My name is Killian Smith and this is my assignment 4 for real-time rendering, which will be exploring different texture filtering techniques within OpenGL. In this demonstration I'll be showing 4 different techniques: nearest, bilinear, mipmapping and anisotropic texturing. We'll begin with the simplest of the nearest, and we'll build upon each one and see how we can improve on some of the issues that arise with artifacts with distance and extreme viewing angles, some of which can be seen here already. We see with both bilinear and nearest filtering, we have some banding and lost texels and pixels, while with anisotropic and mipmapping, we have a much more detailed view from a distance. Moving closer, we'll examine these in a bit more detail. We'll start with bilinear and nearest filtering. Nearest is most likely the simplest. We see it has a pixelated, jaggy look, as it uses no interpolation between the sample point and the nearest texel. As see here, as we increase the viewing angle, we see here we start to lose some detail. We see banding, artifacting and lost pixels. An improvement in this is using bilinear filtering. This interpolates between the sample point and the nearest texel. We see a clear difference between nearest and bilinear up close. As you see, bilinear is a little bit blurrier compared to nearest. This slightly improves some of the banding and lost pixels we get, but not much, especially with this texture. If we go lower, we use a grid texture, we start to see a bit more of a difference. We see much more lost pixels than with bilinear filtering up here. An improvement on bilinear filtering is using mipmapping. This generates textures at different resolutions, which can be used at various viewing angles to decrease some of this artifacting that we're seeing. You see here, compared to bilinear filtering, we definitely see a very large difference with detail. We don't seem to lose as many pixels, but the issue is we do see it's quite blurry. The mipmapping being used here is linear. And as such, it essentially uses trilinear filtering, bilinear on the texture level and another level of linear interpolation between the mipmap levels. We can make a further improvement in this by looking at anisotropic. This is essentially another form of mipmapping, which creates a number of different textures with different scaling resolutions, but they're not all grade resolutions. We see them in different ratios, 4:1, etc. And this creates a much more pleasant look at steeper viewing angles. As you can see here, there is much less lost detail further on compared to mipmapping, which you can see is much blurrier. This can definitely be seen with this grid texture. See, we lose much detail with mipmapping compared to anisotropic. It is much better. I've also created a quick demonstration of the different mipmap options within OpenGL. These options determine what kind of sampling technique is used on both the texture level and the mipmap level. As mentioned previously with GL linear, mipmap linear, this essentially does a trilinear interpolation, in which we do a bilinear interpolation on the texture level as well as a linear interpolation between the mipmaps. This same logic applies across. Here we have a GL nearest, mipmap nearest. This does a near sampling technique on the texture level as well as on the mipmap level. We see here, we see slightly jagged lines, but also jagged transitions between the different levels. Comparing this one to the second option we have here, which is nearest linear, which is a linear interpolation between the mipmap levels. We see as we go to a sharper angle, we have much smoother transitions between the different levels. Here we see a jagged line with another jagged line here. We see 3 distinct mipmap levels, while here it is much harder to distinguish. Another one we have is linear nearest. This again is doing the same, is doing nearest sampling on the mipmap level with linear interpolation on the texture level. Again, we see 3 distinct bands with a much more blurry effect at the higher viewing angles. And lastly, we have linear. We definitely miss the banding effect that we had with the near sampling on the mipmap level, but we do have a much blurrier texture at steeper angles.